Never let a serious crisis go to waste. Those are the words of the former mayor of Chicago, former Obama administration bigwig, Rahm Emanuel. I never really had attributed that quote to Rahm Emanuel. I imagine that quote could be attributed to any number of politicians throughout history who take advantage of crises to enact the agenda that they want to enact, but that the people wouldn't support under other circumstances. And so in this presentation, I want to talk to you about two things I believe you'll see happen from the government after this crisis subsides. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson, and for years we've been telling you here at Nomad Capitalist to go where you're treated best. Those are the 5 magic words, and I'm going to come back to why that's relevant to life in the time of crisis. But if you want to learn how Nomad Capitalist actually helps people protect themselves and go where they're treated best, learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. We work with a lot of business owners, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of investors to protect themselves and survive and thrive all over the world. But I think that right now we have to really ask ourselves, what's going to happen after this current crisis ends? What is the government going to do? The most dangerous words in the English language, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. And in times of crisis, people forget that. They go and run to the government for help. I'm looking at my social media. I have friends who they call themselves libertarians, and they're saying, well, I think this stimulus program is probably a good idea. We got to listen to the government. They know what they're doing. I can tell you pretty conclusively, the government does not know what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying that this current pandemic has not been an issue. It's affected a lot of people. Certainly, I think that that some governments and some people in the government use that to their advantage. Two things you're going to see in the next couple of years, if not sooner. You're going to see governments raising taxes, and you're going to see more restrictions on your lifestyle. And I'm going to talk about how the international component we discuss will affect this in a moment. You see governments all around the world, though, putting up massive stimulus programs, $2 trillion in the United States. Some other Western countries paying people almost their entire salaries. You're seeing lots of money being put into giving loans and giving grants to businesses that have been shut down. Leave it to government to create a problem and then ride in on a white horse to solve it. And so what is this doing? Well, it's creating a lot of solidarity. And I'm seeing all around the world some of the public health officials that work for various governments are now some of the most popular people in those countries, if not the most popular people in the country. And so whenever you see a panic like this, we saw it in 9/11 with George W. Bush, politicians, leaders become highly respected, approval ratings go up, people trust them, they give them broad powers. And what happens as a result? Well, we'll talk about some of the restrictions in a moment. But as part of that, you're going to see people gaining strength against the wealthy. We've seen that already where wealthy people have donated millions, tens of millions, and more dollars to causes associated with the current crisis, only to be ridiculed, only to be told they're only doing it to clear their conscience, only to be accused of all sorts of a litany of different things. One reason that I choose the philanthropy that I choose is not only do I do it privately, I give to people who actually value the money, actually use the money efficiently, and actually use it to grow rather than using it just to blame me for giving money for a guilty conscience. Now, I don't have tens of millions of dollars just to give away and to not miss it. But you are seeing a continued attack on the wealthy. And understand, I just read an article in the New York Times where some left-wing loon was lambasting wealthy people who were going and living in their homes in the Hamptons. She was calling them corrupt. She was calling them crooks. She was saying that they were contributing to the problem. You're going to see that narrative in the media, and that narrative is going to be used for politicians to get together and do what they've always done, which is say, we're going to raise taxes, but not on most people, because they're the ones who've suffered. They've suffered at the hands of the government, not because the business owners wanted their businesses to be shut down, because the government told them they had to shut down. And so now you're going to see the wealthy people being asked to foot the bill. Tax rates will go up, not only because you have these massive stimulus programs, governments have never been more in debt, but because there's going to be a push to make wealthy people pay their fair share and to basically demonize them. You've seen solidarity among people, But really, you're going to start to see people pushing back against the wealthy. And so tax rates are going to go up to pay the bill, and just because it will become politically expedient to do so. Never let a crisis go to waste. And obviously politicians, I mean, they would have tried to find another way to raise taxes, but now they've got a great reason to do so. And so if you're a wealthy person, you're going to see your taxes go up. What I saw from that New York Times article, though, was, what is rich? I remember there's an old political saying that basically says, if you make $60,000 and your neighbor makes $70,000, your neighbor's rich in your opinion. I never really understood this. If you talk to the average person, even in most wealthy countries, and you say, hey, would you like to have an extra $500 a month, 500 pounds a month, 500 euros a month, or maybe $1,000 a month extra? It doesn't seem like a lot of money to those of us who run businesses, but to the average person, even to the average person in a wealthy country, that's the difference between success and failure for them in many cases. That's the difference between they can pay their massive credit card debt and they can't. That's the difference between they can go on vacation and they can't. And a lot of other things. And so imagine that if an extra $1,000 a month is considered a great windfall for folks. Imagine if governments like the United States can buy off its citizens with a $1,200 stimulus check. A one-time check of $1,200. People they think it's going to change their lives somehow. Imagine if you're a guy who makes $500,000. Are you rich? You're certainly successful. Are you the evil 1% corporate overlords who are dooming the planet because you're secretly, empowering Agenda 21 and you want to microchip everyone? No. Not $500,000. You're not in that camp if you're making $500,000. You're not in that camp if you're making $1 million. You're not in that camp if you're making $5 million or $10 million. I've met with people who have hundreds of millions of dollars. They're not in the camp. They're not part of the chosen class of people of the United Nations who are figuring out how we should all live either. But you'll be put into the camp as if you're some evil billionaire because you make a couple $100,000 a year, and you'll be asked to pay more. That's the first thing that's going to happen. The second thing that's going to happen is you're going to see more restrictions on your movement. We saw this in the United States and then worldwide after 9/11. People will accept a reduction in liberties in order to feel safe. I especially see that in the Western world where, let's be honest, I come from the United States. We have a lot of people that we help who come from Western countries. But I spend time with a lot of folks who are from Eastern Europe, who are from Latin America, who are from Asia. They've seen actual adversity. Not to say that 9/11 wasn't a tragedy, or not to say that a pandemic isn't a tragedy, but they've seen widespread currency devaluation. They've seen communism. They've seen all kinds of problems. And they have a stronger stomach for pushing back in some countries against having their liberties taken away. But after 9/11, we saw the U.S. impose the TSA. Suddenly people who were very conservative, fiscal conservatives, who did not want the government to grow, suddenly said, you know what? Let's take the power out of private security companies for checking us at the airport, and let's create a whole new government agency. Listen to that again. People who hate the government and who don't trust the government and who want to shrink the government, in their own words, they run for public office, they vote for politicians that say they want to do that, whatever. They came out en masse and said, let's have a new government agency. Because they rallied around the president and they said, that's what we have to do. And you're going to see people doing that. You're going to see people rallying around politicians. And I do think it will happen worse in Western countries. I can tell you, when I go to the airport in Malaysia and I fly to Malaysia, I'll sometimes have a water bottle by mistake. I don't get harassed. I don't get beaten up the way that you would if you go through the TSA or in Australia. I have gotten the random water bottle through. I do think some countries take a bit of a different approach. But you're going to see, especially in the Western world, where people have had it pretty good for their entire lives. They've never seen a real crisis. They've never seen a chaos. They've seen recessions, but okay, recessions come and go. They've never seen some life-altering scenario the way people in other parts of the world have, and they're just going to say, we can't handle this, please government, take it over and solve the problem. You are going to see new things, and I don't know what they're going to be necessarily. You may see new travel restrictions. If you're a European Union citizen, it's going to be very interesting to watch. I'm not making any bold predictions because I don't want to be doom and gloom. It's not my personality really, but I mean, look at what happened during this crisis. Suddenly freedom of movement in the European Union stopped. And so for everyone who's coming and saying, Andrew, I want a European Union passport so I can live and work all over Europe, who knows what happens with that? Who knows if certain countries say, you know what, we don't care, because it's already been happening in Poland and Hungary where they've said, haha, EU, we're not going to follow your rules. We're going to do what we want. We're going to act so undemocratically. We're going to throw out the whole rule book. Oh, and by the way, you need a unanimous vote to get rid of one of us, and so we'll help each other. Poland and Hungary. Can't get rid of them, the European Union. They don't even follow the rules. So imagine what happens if other countries decide to do that. You may have a very divided European Union. You may have less freedom of movement. You may have more government agencies saying we need to spy on you, putting a surveillance state in place. We need more cameras. We need to be checking people. You got to download an app and report your temperature. We're going to take over some of your medical data. Who knows what those things could be? What I will say is the opportunity for nomad capitalists is to create an international lifestyle where, number one, you can free yourself from the tax burden of where you're from. There will still be countries that are safe havens for people who don't believe you should pay 50, 60, 70% or more in tax. The time to set up your company in those places, the time to potentially move overseas or move in and establish your tax residence in one of those places, now could be a great time to do that. You could at least get the paperwork started, even if you're sitting at home. And so there will be places where you can go. If you're an American, you're going to have more formal tax planning. We'll see if other countries, South Africa is going to start to catch up to the United States in terms of making it very difficult for its citizens to leave, although not quite matching the U.S. style citizenship-based taxation. It will be interesting if other countries in this moment of solidarity or in the coming years will start to implement similar measures where it's nearly impossible to leave the country for tax purposes, or where simply you have to report all of your stuff around the world, as U.S. citizens now do. It's still possible for U.S. citizens to dramatically reduce their taxes by going overseas. You just have a paperwork burden, and you have some costs that come with that. So it's not as clean as everyone else, but you still can go out and save substantial money. That's one way that you can reduce your taxes. We have plenty of content on our website, nomadcapitalist.com, on YouTube, where you can watch and you can learn those strategies on tax. I believe setting that up is going to be important, because what we see is countries imposing more and more stringent exit tax rules, where if you leave, you've got to pay. If you start a business and you move it, it's more difficult. So the sooner you can move your business, the sooner you can move yourself, the better. The second thing is, I do think as nomad capitalists, we often live a life in countries where we somewhat skate above the surface. Now, I'm not saying that you don't, want to be a good citizen. And obviously we can all have a different version of what a good citizen is, right? If you're infected with the virus, you should not be walking around town infecting people. That's just a nice thing to do. But I think, my experience in some of the countries that I've lived in, they look at me and say, oh, he's not from here. Leave him alone. And there's a bit more of an honor system in some countries where if you obviously are not their citizen, they don't bother you as much. Or if you live in a part of town that is more of a city center or more of a business district or more expat driven, they may leave you alone more. They may say, all right, you want to walk around your neighborhood, that's fine. We've seen that in some countries around the world. The expat centers have had things like fewer roadblocks, etc. And so while I do think that you'll see a lot of the countries that we talk about, the new safe havens, the emerging countries, will be great places to live because the governments aren't going to be, waging spying campaigns on you. I don't foresee a country like Malaysia going to roll out, nationwide facial recognition at every crosswalk. There's just certain countries that don't have the will to do that. But I think in other cases, you're going to see places where you can somewhat float above the surface, hopefully in a responsible way, where they're just, hey, we're busy over here, you do your thing. If I were to be in the United States, they would figure, hey, this guy could be from here, and here's the crackdown. We've seen that in Europe. I think there are opportunities for people to find where they can live in their own nomad bubble and have a certain amount of freedom, more so than people even in the entire country have. Diplomats, by the way, have those freedoms. You look at a lot of these countries that have been war-torn, the Afghanistans of the world, there are diplomatic enclaves where diplomats have relative freedom to go out and play and enjoy themselves within the highly secured walls of the diplomatic complex. Yet, I'm sure a lot of them would say you should not have those freedoms. If you do if you live the lifestyle that I'm talking about, there are ways you can kind of create your own nomad bubble and have greater freedoms even than in the country that already gives you greater freedoms than many countries in the West. So that's what I think is going to happen. I think higher taxes, governments are more in debt than ever. They're going to make the quote-unquote rich disproportionately pay. What they'll define as rich is whatever they can get away with. I think you may see some instances where governments will have to dip into retirement accounts. More governments will put in bail-in measures on their banks so that when this happens again, or when banks go under, or when the government needs money, they're going to come to you and ask for it. It's not going to be the bank. Your retirement fund is maybe going to be subject to having some of its money taken. We've already seen that in countries throughout Europe. And I think they're also going to restrict your movements. So what does that mean? It means the same things we've been talking about for years. Having multiple bank accounts in multiple countries to where no one country controls all of your money. It means having assets in other countries to where no one country controls your assets, and you have a home where you can go and live and you're safe, and hopefully in a country where there's more freedom and the government doesn't really seem to bother you too much, or they don't care about you as much. Smaller countries generally are better for that. Having a second passport so that one country can't take your passport away or keep you in or do whatever they're going to do. Say, hey, if you don't follow our rules, we're canceling your passport, the way the IRS has said we can take your passport, or where governments have said if you don't pay certain obligations that we come up with, we can take your passport. So having all those things, the reasons may change. The impetus for you to do this may change. I've been talking about this stuff for many years now. These are strategies that help people. Being internationally diversified means you'll be protected, that whenever the government has their next harebrained scheme and whenever they're ready to cash in on the next crisis, you will no longer have to deal with whatever they throw at you. You will be prepared. That is why we say, go where you're treated best. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.